I'm great, thank you. And yeah, congratulations on the program. You raised so many very, very interesting issues.
Thank
And
you.
well done as well on the investigation into the Israeli funding of just about everybody in UK politics.
Thank you,
A
Jeff.
great exposition and wonderful research.
Thank you. Very much appreciate that, and more to come. So let us talk about British MP Rupert Lowe launching another new initiative. He must fall out of bed in the morning and say, I know, I've got an idea. Let me launch this now, and let me bring in money from the public, and let's do this. He seems to do them rather a lot. And he also seems to be living at the moment by social media as well. And I think he's going to find out sooner or later, Jeff. I don't know about you, but X is not the world. X is far from the world and not representative of the world. So let us talk about his new initiative. Here is an image of Rupert Lowe with the man who he is also involved with for this new initiative, Restore Britain. Start wherever you want to, Jeff.
Yeah, so Restore Britain is not, is at pains to make this point. There's not a new political party, but rather a mouthpiece, which I thought was an interesting choice of words. He has a little video on the Restore Britain Twitter account where he says that he wants it to be a mouthpiece to restore British values. But of course, these values that he refers to seem to be sectarianism. Essentially, he wants identity politics to be front and center of British political life. And that's a role that sectarianism has never played in British politics. And it's all about Islamic fundamentalists destroying the fabric of British society. And of course, that focuses very much on the small boat problem, etc. But the primary point about this new entity, this Restore Britain organization, is that it's a money-making operation for Rupert Lowe.
First of all, I want to draw attention to this. And this is Charlie Downs, who's in that image. And he wrote a piece in the Mail on Sunday yesterday. And I think this alone is a really problematic headline. And the headline is, Britain's in decline. Democracy has lost its way. It's no wonder so many of my generation believe it's time for a dictator. And I presume that dictator that's being offered up is Rupert Lowe, right? You had a real problem with that article. So let's just start there first.
Yeah, it draws attention to an issue that many of us have had in terms of the basis of British democracy, that the party political system doesn't seem to be working. But Charlie is suggesting that we needed a dictator because democracy is flawed. And therefore, Rupert Lowe, I assume he's referring to in the article, would be an appropriate dictator. So this means that, for example, we should scrap all human rights legislation. We should withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights. We should no longer be a signatory of the European Convention on Human Rights. And that we instead should have some convener or orchestrator of everything, or dictator in the form of Rupert Lowe. This is absolutely astonishing stuff. Meanwhile, of course, they're mounting a fundraising campaign for the proposed new mouthpiece for Britain, and namely Restore Britain. And as I was trying to say earlier, this model is one that's used a lot by the new right, the neocon right. It's all about raising money. And even in Rupert Lowe's address to the nation, on his Twitter account, when he launches Restore Britain, he talks about having very successfully fronted a crowdfunding program in relation to the Rotherham
the grooming gangs,
child grooming campaign. And so it was about crowdfunding rather than anything else. And of course, Rupert didn't really take any interest in the Rotherham issue prior to it being suggested, probably by Elon Musk and JD Vance.
Yeah, almost certainly. And just look at some of this money, right? And this seems like a very exclusive club because let's restore Britain again. And when I heard that, I was like, yeah, I bet I can see exactly what kind of restore Britain you want to go back to, Rupert Lowe. You probably want to go back to a kind of landowning, feudalistic past where the peasants know their place. Frankly, I don't have time for him. But the money is a very interesting issue, right? In terms of restore Britain, not only there are other amounts to pay, but if you want to be part of the exclusive Cromwell Club, You pay an annual donation of 2,500. That's a lot of dosh.
But you get a tie, apparently.
Oh,
He's going to
nice.
give you a tie.
Ugh, just gives me the creeps. All the things I absolutely detest about politics. But you discovered something really interesting. And that, of course, was what made me go, oh, I want to discuss this. Right. And that is the links to technocracy. What is that, Jeff? What's going on here?
Well, if you go to the Restore Britain site, the fundraising platform is actually built on a third-party platform that has been in turn built by a spin-out group from Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg's former flatmate at Harvard created this organization called Nation Builder. So if you scroll right down to the bottom of the site, you'll see that the payment processing is handled by Nation Builder. Probably the website is handled by Nation Builder. And this is an American organization based in, I think, initially in LA, but of course, being funded by all of the great and the good of Silicon Valley, including Sean Parker, who was also behind Facebook, and Andreessen Horowitz, who's Mark Andreessen is a good friend of Elon Musk's, and is essentially a member of the PayPal mafia, including Peter Thiel. So this does seem to relate to Musk. So Musk, during the time of the Rotherham rape gang campaign mounted by Rupert Lowe and to some extent by members of the Reform Party, was being egged on by Elon Musk. And of course, Elon Musk is one of these PayPal mafia members, along with Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel was an initial funder of Nation Builder. So it does appear that there is some, and of course, collectively that group, Andreessen Horowitz, Sean Parker, Peter Thiel, yada, yada, they're all part of this sort of technocracy movement, which believes that everybody should be monitored and controlled, and that a dictator would probably be a better form of government to ensure that we're all well behaved. And digital ID is front and center of this technocratic idea. So there's precious little coming from Rupert Lowe, or indeed the Reform Party, against digital ID as a policy direction.
Fact.
And indeed, of course, Nigel Farage has been front and center of this whole discussion around, for example, digital ID and who should be the COVID-19 czar. And that should be, of course, Tony Blair. So there is a kind of technocratic agenda creeping into the Reform Party, and also increasingly into Rupert Lowe's tweeting.
Exactly. And this is, you reminded me this morning, Elon Musk had tweeted about Rupert Lowe back in January, when Elon Musk decided that he was going to pull away his favors from Nigel Farage, because there was that whole idea that he was going to allegedly donate something like £100 million to the Reform campaign. And then he seemed not to like Nigel Farage anymore. And he tweeted, "I've not met Rupert Lowe, but his statements online that I have read so far make a lot of sense." And I noted that Restore Britain was only following 5 people yesterday, and one of them was Elon Musk. And I thought, again, that is interesting. So it would appear that a party that is being set up allegedly for the people may in fact have far more to do with Silicon Valley technocrats than British people who want to restore our nation.
Yeah, it would. And it actually goes right back to an interview that J.D. Vance did with Joe Rogan. This is prior to the election, the presidential election, where he said that he had identified that the only potential Islamic nation in Europe was the United Kingdom, that there was this sort of emerging threat from fundamental Islam. And of course, he referred to the immigration problem, etc. And then, of course, the whole Rotherham after the election of Trump, and the Mar-a-Lago meetings and Farage being over there, etc. We then saw this creeping messaging around the reinvestigation of the Rotherham rape gangs. And of course, Lowe was front and center of that. And with every tweet, Musk was responding, "Wow, super, incredible." So it does appear that this is a kind of orchestrated campaign to create fundamental division and sectarianism at the heart of British politics. and that the only way of countering it is the same way that they're proposing countering it in the United States, namely with some form of digital ID system that will be probably managed by Peter Thiel, one of his many companies. So and I think the fact that Rupert Lowe is aligned with that would imply that this whole approach is going to be front and center of his agenda. And I would go even further and suggest that it's so insidious, this kind of idea, that we're a fundamentally divided society, and there's a threat within. And of course, the Trump administration is wall-to-wall Zionist, as you have pointed out as well.
I think it's interesting that we're having this discussion, of course, on the 20th anniversary of 7/7, which was very much about the threat from within, the Muslim threat from within. And I'm going to be unpacking that later and looking at the official narrative as well as the alternative narrative of that. But it is interesting. Obviously, both Musk and Rupert Lowe appear to be suffering from Muslim derangement syndrome. They are absolutely obsessed, the pair of them. Rupert Lowe, he must be dreaming up these tweets in his sleep, because he is tweeting like crazy. And again, I think whereas Musk decided to launch his new party based on a petition or a poll on X, I think both Musk and Lowe are sooner or later going to realize that their so-called popularity online does not translate into real life. I'm not convinced that they have the level of backing in real. My neighbors don't even know who Rupert Lowe is, right? Then nobody has any idea. And I'm like, go on X, then you'll know. And he seems to be a solely social media entity in some respects. But there's more to this, isn't there? Which you've already just started to say, and about how forces are coming together from left and right. And so I want you to kind of like continue on that path, really, Jeff. Tell me more about that.
Well, just before leaving Rupert Lowe, I think one of the techniques that and I do think that there is clearly an intelligence agency driven agenda behind this. There's a lot of psyops going on these days. But one of the techniques they use is to create sort of false schisms. You cannot have the apparent democratic process working, as far as the public is concerned, unless you have these breakups. So you have the MAGA Musk breakup, and now, of course, we've got the Farage Lowe breakup. The agenda, I think, is pretty much the same, but you have to create the impression that there's this schism, that there are sort of petulant arguments in the White House, etc., or petulant arguments in Westminster. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The momentum is pretty much coming from the same direction, namely, it is very much a technocratic agenda, but it's affecting the left as much as it is affecting the right. One of the other techniques they have is to associate what should be seen as opposition or taking an alternative viewpoint with terrorism. And I wrote an article about this last week in relation to the Glastonbury activities. But so you have kneecap, for example, emerging from Northern Ireland, the sort of microcosm of all things sectarianism. And the association of kneecap with giving this organization, which is pro-Palestine, a whiff of sort of terrorism is no bad thing, because it means that people like Rupert Lowe can go hammer and tongs against this type of thing and say that it's associated with Hamas.
Something to kick against, right? Yeah.
And similarly with Bob Villan, you had him making it clear that he was in favor of the annihilation of Israeli soldiers, etc. So it is clearly an attempt to, again, divide and to create friction and to associate the liberal left, namely the Glastonbury crowd, with this sort of pro-terrorist positioning. So namely, it's a psyop, it's clearly a psyop. So it divides fundamentally the audience. And a similar thing has happened in terms of Jeremy Corbyn. So he also actually, it's a bit of a mess, but Zara Sultana, of course, essentially resigned her Labour whip and announced that she was going to be forming a new political party with Jeremy Corbyn. I think she jumped the gun a little bit, but certainly Corbyn suffered the same fate, namely, he became very much associated with supposedly anti-Semitism by supporting Palestine, which is a perfectly legitimate position to take.
Right.
Now, I'm no fan of Jeremy Corbyn at all, but
he's a lifelong anti-racist. Like nobody
absolutely.
gets any different. There's documented evidence of this. I mean, really.
Absolutely. And he was. I remember, if you remember, the campaign towards the end, before he was essentially ousted as Labour leader, was very much to associate him with Sinn Féin.
Oh yeah.
So that he is seen to be an apologist for terror. But so these tech, and by the way, I was probably quite supportive of that, the campaign against him at that time. But I think if we see it from a slightly different perspective, that the media is manipulating situations to create division and to create an alternative narrative, then I think we should all have a little bit more sympathy for people like Corbyn. And I think his intention to create an alternative voice on the left is well intentioned, because it rightly will draw attention back again to some of the fundamental issues that are facing us as a society, namely to what extent we are being infiltrated by foreign forces from either Israel or America.
One of the things that I find particularly egregious with all these new groups that are sort of springing up, Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe and whoever it is I come from a background which was very, very impoverished. For us, free school meals wasn't a useful thing. It was a necessity, as one example. My family aspired to be working class, right? We were like hardcore, significantly impoverished. And what I'm seeing is people who are extremely feeling disenfranchised and dispossessed, coming from similar backgrounds that I came from, being taken advantage of by these middle class people like Lawrence Fox, like Rupert Lowe, and they are literally taking advantage of the fact that the people, these target groups are feeling they're disenfranchised. But it's an old story. What happens when the indigenous population feel disenfranchised and unheard? They blame the incomers. It's an old story. It's been going on for at least 150 years. We know it. It's documented. So this is nothing new what's taking place. But what we have is this kind of new bank of people like the Lows, like the Foxes, like the Ben Habibs. What do you think about all these new groups? Are they going to split the vote, or are they all part of the same kind of, whatever it is, psyop?
I essentially think they're agents provocateurs.
Right,
and
so do I.
Yeah, I think they're probably all motivated by money, and you had Mary Finch on a few weeks ago talking about the Lucy Connolly situation where immediately, there's a crowdfunding program goes up, essentially hosted by Lawrence Fox and Democracy 3.0. But it always seems to be related to money. In other words, these people do nothing unless they are paid to do it.
Right.
And it's the antithesis of campaigning. It is the antithesis of political passion. Say what you want about Jeremy Corbyn, but at least he does seem to be motivated by the right things. I don't know. He might not. I can't possibly say. I'm suspicious of every politician these days.
Well, they've made us so. They've made us so.
Yeah, absolutely. And but it does seem that every campaign has some type of fundraising agenda behind it. And it could be that they're actually being paid off by the powers that be or media organizations. No, it's interesting that a guy that I've never heard of before until you mentioned his name earlier, but until a few days ago when I started looking at this Restore Britain thing is Rupert Lowe's sidekick, this guy, what's his name? Charlie
Downs. He's 23 years old and he's sounding like something from the Third Reich. It's astonishing. How do you get to be that ignorant and only 23? I mean,
absolutely. And I looked at his Twitter account, and he's got over 50,000 followers, probably, on the back of this whole Restore Britain thing. And apparently he writes for the Daily Mail. And in fact, he did feature a large double, spread article that he had written in relation to the Bob Villan thing at Glastonbury last week for the Daily Mail. But he's also a commentator on GB News, LBC, Talk TV. In other words, all the usual suspects. So, and of course now he's front and center of a new political organization, which seems to be all about, as you have mentioned, raising money from the unsuspecting public, or people who are riled or annoyed or feel disenfranchised. They're just simply being taken advantage of by these political opportunists.
I want to read a quote from his article because I think this says rather a lot. And as I say, he's only 23. So to a certain degree, I give him a bit of leeway because hopefully he'll mature. But one of the quotes from the article is, "As for democracy, it's obvious from the visible decline in our country, which worsened after the 2008 financial crash and which has accelerated under Keir Starmer, this isn't delivering the right results." No, democracy is not delivering the right results. It's the fact that our politicians are sold. So I hate the way that he's already positioning like that because it is that the article is literally about why we need a dictatorship. And presumably, as we say, this is about Rupert Lowe. So this is extraordinary. At 23 years old, you're talking like this. God's sake. It's disturbing, Jeff, really disturbing. But like you say, like you, I had never heard of him. And now suddenly he's in the pages of the Mail on Sunday, the Daily Mail. He has a big Twitter following, and he appeared to come from nowhere. So I don't know. We shall see. But Jeff, anything else that we need to add to this for now?
Just one slightly disturbing thing I've noticed as well, in that we have over the last few years seen the emergence of a few political parties, small political parties that do seem to represent a growing constituency, people who are very disenfranchised, feel they have been sidelined by the political process. But I detect that some of these parties are beginning to align themselves with Lowe. So I would just put out a public cry, independents and people who have maybe joined like the Heritage Party or some of the other fringe parties. Keep your resolve